Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking about a perennial 1L problem area, which is organizing your time and your life so you can get everything done in law school. Your Law School Toolbox hosts are Allison Monahan and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the Catapult Career Conference. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about a perennial 1L problem area, organizing your time and your life so you can get everything done in law school and still be a somewhat normal human being.
Somewhat.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. We get so many questions about this because time management in law school is a challenge for everybody. I don't think there's anybody who doesn't struggle with managing their time in law school.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot to talk about and there's a lot to get done in law school. So let's jump right in.
All right. So what about the basics? What type of obligations are students going to have in law school? And how can we plan for them?
Well, I think a lot of it's pretty obvious. You're going to have to go to class. That's probably going to be several hours a day most days. If you're lucky, you might get one of the 5 working days off. Like I, for example, I don't think I ever had a class on Fridays, which was kind of amazing.
That is kind of amazing.
Yeah, even as a 1L. But of course, it meant you had more class the other days, but, it's a trade-off. You're obviously going to have to do a lot of reading for class. I think for most people, this ends up being several hours every single day, plus time on the weekends. You're going to have a lot of legal writing work. Legal research and writing is one of those classes that can really take up a bunch of time and can somehow, it seems like, always takes over your schedule whenever anything is due. So that's something to watch out for and really plan for. Also, I think one of the things that's really critical is the deep work of putting this stuff together, making sense of it, doing practice tests. That's easy to push aside, but really critical to success. And then you're going to have all this optional stuff that looks great on your resume, but do you have time for it? I don't know. It's your choice. Things like pro bono work or club meetings or even social events. Where you're going to go to bar review night on Thursday nights or whenever your school has it. It's a great way to network, but if it leaves you hungover for Friday classes, I don't know. Might not be the best choice.
Yeah, my 1L year, I had something like an 8 or a 9 o'clock contracts class on Friday mornings. So
that's pretty brutal.
It was pretty brutal. Yes.
All right, so that's kind of the stuff you have to do. How can you plan for this stuff?
Well, I think there are a lot of ways that you can plan for it. One thing before we go on, though, that I want to make a point about classes is oftentimes 1Ls don't get a choice in when your 1L classes are.
I think pretty much that's true across the board.
So some schools let you take one elective, like one semester of your 1L year. But, as an incoming student, especially if you had a lot of control over your schedule in undergrad, that maybe it's going to be a little surprising to just have a schedule handed to you. Because I'll be honest, I would not have volunteered for a first thing in the morning contracts class on Friday.
Right, and you're probably not going to have a choice in which professor you take either.
No, because you're all broken into these sections, and then you take a lot of these classes with the same people. So that's just something to keep in mind if you're coming into law school, is that you may have these ideas of what your ideal schedule would be. Maybe you're not a morning person and would prefer not to go to class first thing in the morning, but if your school decides that you're going to class first thing in the morning, get used to it. Get up early, drink some coffee.
Yeah, I do know one person who somehow managed to switch classes because he really, really, really hated the professor. Mm-hmm. But it took weeks of effort and was a lot of work. So I don't think that's something, if you have a legitimate situation, like you have to drop your child at school and there's just literally no way that you can get to an 8 a.m. class, maybe they'll let you switch out of it. It's worth asking, but it's got to be a pretty good excuse. And even then it might not work.
Mm-hmm. So this isn't just the full list of stuff, though, that goes on in your life, because almost everybody else should have other activities they do and they need to schedule for, too. So what are some of these other activities that people should be taking into consideration?
Well, I always say you should schedule your exercise. Some people think like, oh, I'll just do that whenever I can, but that's a recipe for not doing it.
Yep.
So, at least I found in law school, I was much more likely if I had joined a gym class and paid something for it, even if it was a minimal amount. And I had it on my calendar, you know, every Tuesday at noon, I was going to this weightlifting class or belly dancing. Like, you know, I took some crazy classes. But if you schedule it, you're much more likely to show up.
Mm-hmm. And I think breaks are really important to schedule in too. You know, if you need date nights with your best friends, or movie nights, or time away from the law school grind. R&R is incredibly important. Whatever you do to relax, and it doesn't always need to be with law school people. Really encourage you to schedule in some time off with some non-law school folks, if you have those folks in your community where you're going to law school, because they can really keep you sane.
Yeah, and I think, again, like scheduling that time off, that's a great idea, because otherwise your work is just sort of going to bleed into things. Mm-hmm. But if you know that you have plans to go see a movie with a friend on Friday night, you're much more likely to do that. Otherwise, you might find yourself, well, I'm kind of bored. I don't really have anything to do. Oh, I'll just study some more.
Right.
And, you know, that's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah, exactly.
I think one other thing, you know, people should think about at least is you got to plan around how you're going to eat. I mean, it sounds sounds kind of crazy, but this takes essentially, you either have to spend a lot of money on this, or you have to spend a chunk of time on it.
It's true.
So, you know, when are you going to shop for food, or are you going to use a delivery service that might be more expensive? When are you going to prepare your food, or are you going to go out to eat, which might be more expensive? You know, so if you are someone who wants to shop and prepare your own food, that's going to take time, and you're much more likely to do that if you actually schedule the time for it.
And the beautiful thing about being in law school is oftentimes you can run some of these life errands when it's much less time consuming to do so. So when I was in law school, I used to go to Trader Joe's on Monday, like mid-morning between my class
like
breaks.
There
was nobody there. And if anyone listening to this is from San Francisco, there's one particular Trader Joe's where the parking lot has a line, like
it's awful.
Yeah, running down the street. I mean, it's really intense in the evenings and on the weekends. I mean, going to Trader Joe's is like a full contact experience. So when I realized I could start running those errands, you know, mid-morning between classes, that cut my grocery shopping time in half, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes, you know, it's a good sort of, if you have a mental list of things that you need to do to keep your life running smoothly, you can fit those into times where you're not going to be effective studying anyway.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you just have a little bit of time between classes, or if you're already been studying for 7 hours and you just feel like you can't read another case, you know, instead of just sitting around watching TV, it can be refreshing actually to like walk to the grocery store and do your shopping and come back. And then you're like, oh, I'm so virtuous. I bought all these vegetables. This is great.
Yep.
So, you know, you can think about ways to fit things in that don't necessarily, you know, in chunks of time that aren't going to be productive for studying anyway.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And you can get creative on how you get your items. I have a friend who was explaining to me the benefits of the Amazon Subscribe and Save, which
I can see that.
Yeah, where she basically said once she figured out like how many paper towels her home used in a month and how much toilet paper and how much dishwashing detergent, that she was able to take a bunch of these home items that you basically just need to have stocked and have them delivered on a regular basis. And you can do that at a discount. And it's all automatically set up. So you never run out of toilet paper, because the toilet paper is just like showing up at your house when you are going to need toilet paper. And although it can seem a little tedious to set that stuff up, I do think that removing those lists of things that you need to remember whenever possible, you know, things like toothbrush heads, if you use an electric toothbrush, or, you know, razors, like stuff we all run out of on a regular basis that can cause you to have to go to, you know, the drugstore every couple weeks because you forgot, or you shop at Whole Foods and you can't buy razors at Whole Foods or whatever it might be. You know, that's always my complaint about Whole Foods. You can't do like all your shopping at Whole Foods. You have to, you know, go do multiple stops. So that's just something to consider, that maybe over the summer before school starts, or even on a break, you can try and set up some things to make your life easier, and it may not even be as expensive as getting food delivered. I've also heard some really great things from some folks about Amazon Fresh, which does deliver your groceries, and that the price difference is really not that much. So that's another thing maybe to experiment trying out before school starts, to see if that's another way to, reduce some of the time that you need to spend, you know, feeding yourself and keeping your kitchen stocked.
Yeah, when I was in law school, we did a CSA, me and my two roommates. And so I mean, honestly, at some point we were just like, we cannot look at another rutabaga. But, you know, it was New York in the winter. Like, what were they going to send you? Really?
Right.
But it actually was good because, you know, we had food arriving regularly. Someone would deal with it. You know, we would have to experiment with some new recipes or something. And oftentimes we would eat together if we made stuff together. And so that was kind of nice. It was social. But most importantly, like, the refrigerator was just never barren because we always had at least something in there. I mean, I'll currently admit that I've been out of paper towels for 2 weeks because I normally get them at Costco. For some reason, Costco did not have them the last time I went to Costco. So I could not get the paper towels I wanted. And I thought, oh, no problem. I'll go to the supermarket nearby, which I know they sell the exact ones that I want. And it's been 2 weeks and I still have no paper towels.
Yeah.
Why? Because I haven't gone to that exact supermarket.
Yeah. So the stuff that you can just, you know, not have to think about just lightens your overall load. I always think about the decision fatigue they talk about with really high performing people. You know, the fact that
Steve Jobs
and Barack Obama like wear almost the exact same thing all the time. So they don't have to decide, you know, what to wear. And
Oh, that's another one we didn't even put, you know, not even thinking about, but what are you going to wear? Like, to the extent you can simplify your closet and have that choice like ready to go before you start school, really going to make your life easier.
It's true, because all of these little things that nag at you just are exhausting. It can just be so nice to have, you know, stuff show up at your house, or, you know, or go to Costco and try and, if, you know, as much as you might have, cabinet space or garage space wherever you're living, try and stock yourself for a good chunk of the semester. Because if you have to constantly be thinking about things or constantly realizing that, you know, all your teachers have holes in them and that you don't have any clothes to wear for school, like, that can be really that can be kind of nerve-wracking. It can be a huge distraction, you know. And I think that you're wise to maybe take a little bit of time over the summer and think about how to make it easier for you to just kind of survive and thrive during this time where it can be easy to get bogged down in school, and then you realize, you know, you're eating like crap, and then you're sleeping like crap, and your house is a disaster, and, you know, you don't need all of those additional things on your plate.
Exactly. You're going to have enough to worry about without worrying about whether you have paper towels.
Yeah. But the clothing one's a good one. And especially if you're transitioning from perhaps being in a working role into a student role. For me, I was working full time when I switched to law school, and I realized I didn't have enough casual clothes to wear to school. I really didn't, because I used to dress in business casual every day.
Right. And, you know, if you want to wear that to class, great, but you're probably going to be a lot more dressed up than everyone else.
Yeah. And when you have the option to wear jeans and a fleece, come on, take it.
True. So, yeah, you know, think about what you can plan for ahead of time. And the other thing is seasonal. I mean, I was coming from California to New York, and I remember I went back to California for the winter break, and then I landed at JFK, and it was 5 degrees and sleeting.
Oh, my gosh.
And I realized, like, I don't have winter clothes. Mm-hmm. You know, like, this would have been a better realization to have had in the 2-week break that I had before I got back to New York City, and suddenly had to spend the first 3 days trying to buy clothes. And, oh, it's January. We now have our spring collection. You know, it's like, it's freaking 5 degrees and sleeting. Like, I need winter clothes.
Right.
And I literally, like, you know, that shouldn't have happened.
Right. That's a really good point. If you're changing location and changing temperatures, you better be prepared for it.
Yeah, so plan ahead.
Yep.
Other things people might consider scheduling for in their time, study group activities.
Oh, yeah.
Now these can be a huge time suck, or they can be really productive, but I think you do probably want to think through what's a reasonable amount of time to be spending. I mean, you can't necessarily do this so far in advance, but once you meet people and you talk about forming a study group, you want to be really sure that you're on the same page about how much time you feel comfortable devoting to this. Because if, you know, one person wants to meet twice a week for an hour and other people want to meet 10 hours a week, like, you should not be in the same study group.
Yeah, I think that's really true. And the activities you're going to do in that study group, you know, what's that time going to be spent doing? Because there are a lot of people who just want to, like, talk about the law. Right.
Or figure, like, well, we'll just figure it out, like, as we go.
Yeah. You may not have a lot of extra time.
We'll figure out what to do, like, as we get started.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, you want to make sure you're on the same page of, like, okay, you know, we're going to work on our own And then we're going to come together and we're going to discuss points we don't agree on or don't understand, or we're going to all take the same practice question and we're going to come together and talk about that, or we're going to go over every point of the substantive law that we've studied in every class. Those are really different.
Yep, I think that's a really good point. Students also have to remember that at a certain point in the semester and during that 1L year, you're going to have to start looking for jobs. And
oh yeah, and that comes faster than you think.
It does come faster than you think, and that's actually quite a lot of work. So you want to be ready for that and realize that when that's going to kick in the semester. For some, isn't it November 1st? Am I remembering that right?
I think you can actually, I think you can start talking to the career services like mid-October or early November. Mm-hmm. And then you can actually, if it's a NALP job, so like firm jobs, a lot of, probably most jobs people would be applying for are NALP certified. But those you can apply for starting December 1st, I believe.
Okay.
So right in the middle of like getting ready for exams, suddenly you're stressed out because you don't have a resume, you're not sure where you want to apply. And if you miss this, it's not the end of the world, but there's certain types of jobs that if you think you're going to be applying for them, you need to be applying that first day.
Yeah. So it might behoove you when you're thinking of your, larger schedule to make notes for yourself, kind of warning you when some of those deadlines are coming up so you can make sure your resume is up to snuff, make sure you meet with career services, and all of that stuff is ready to go, because really December 1st is usually, we're talking 1 week, maybe 2 weeks before all of your finals. And you don't want to be spending a good chunk of one day working on your resume.
Oh, I remember sitting on the floor like November 31st or 30th or whatever it is, 30th, I guess, stuffing paper envelopes with me and my roommate, and we're each sending out like 100 resumes to try to get a 1L summer job. And we're just like, can you believe we're spending time on this right now? Mm-hmm. But, at least our stuff was ready to go like weeks before. So we only had to spend, 2 hours that one night watching Sex and the City and stuffing envelopes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then one thing that we see students really cut back on when you shouldn't is sleep. Oftentimes when, especially like a first semester 1L will reach out to us mid-semester and we start kind of talking about what's going on. And one of the questions we definitely ask about is how much are you sleeping? And I will hear things like 5 hours a night, like every night. I go to bed at, midnight and I get up at 5 to go to the gym. And there are people who can survive on that much sleep, but that's not most of us.
No.
So most of us need more sleep than that. And, diminished sleep can cause a whole host of problems. You can get sick more often. You don't have the cognitive processing abilities that you do when you're rested. Like, you're basically legally drunk at a certain point. So there is advice out there that you should, be working so many hours a day that sleep is the first thing to go. And we really recommend that you don't do that because it's not going to go well. You're also going to be a little older than you were when you were an undergrad. Maybe you were able to pull off stuff when you were 18 and 19 sleep-wise that you're just not going to be able to do even if you're 26, 27. It could be a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, for sure. And, the cognitive overhead of law school is so high that if you're not fresh, you're going to burn out pretty quickly.
Yeah. And I was just reading another book, this book called Wired to Eat by a guy named Rob Wolf that is kind of a really interesting biochemist and has done some interesting books on health and food, but he had a section on sleep in this new book. And one of the things he was talking about was that for some people, it's not just how many hours you sleep, but when you go to sleep. That he really says that, oftentimes a true circadian, like a normal circadian rhythm is going to have you waking up at like between 6 and 7 every day, and that you need to go to bed, at 10 to get those hours. Now, Allison, I know you're like a super night owl.
So I must be highly abnormal.
I know.
My actual sleep schedule, like left to my own devices, pretty much shifts to 2 a.m. to 10 a.m.
Yeah. So you might not be the norm, but I think it is an interesting idea that when people think about sleep, oftentimes we think about sleeping in. But I think that sometimes going to bed earlier can get us those extra hours, especially if you're someone who just wakes up early. You have to get those hours on the other end. The other things that were in this book that we all know about, but many of us don't adhere to, is the dangers of laptops and iPhones in bed, the blue light, and really kind to control for that kind of stuff. And other interesting suggestions he made around sleep, which I hadn't really thought of, were things that I try and do for my kid, create a nighttime routine, and that even as adults, we can really do well with some sort of nighttime routine, be it like how we get ready for bed, or if we then read before bed, or he was even suggesting doing light yoga or meditation before bed, but that all of those things signal to our brains that it's time to wind down. And it can make going to sleep easier. So if you're finding sleep to be challenging, there are tons of things that you can do to play with to hopefully get a little more shut-eye. And then you're going to find that everything else is going to be easier if you're not, strung out and have no rest.
Right. And I think that's right. I mean, I think for a lot of people, it's difficult to shut off the brain after you've been studying or reading until late at night. I mean, a good friend of mine who was at a different law school later told me his whole first year, he basically would leave the library like between 11 and 12 at night and go to a bar by himself. And he's like, yeah, basically I had to have like 2 or 3 drinks every night to wind down. And then I'd go home at like 2 and go to sleep. He's like, yeah, in retrospect, I realized there probably were better ways to cope with that.
Yeah. So if you're someone who already struggles with getting enough sleep, before you take on this kind of challenging time in your life of being in law school, that maybe that's something to think about over the summer, is trying some different techniques to hopefully sleep a little bit better. And that's, I think, where exercise also plays in. If you sit all day, sitting is like not super great for us. So if you sit all day, that can be really problematic also to having you feel good enough to go to bed. So that's why things like exercise or taking walks or doing these other activities that don't include looking at a computer can be so important.
Yeah, I would sometimes take my commercial outlines when I was studying for exams or something. I would take them to the gym and like be on the elliptical with the outline and a highlighter, and like, was it totally perfect? No, but it actually was pretty good.
Yeah. You've got to try stuff to help you mix it up so you just don't feel like you are kind of tied to your desk and defeated by the fact that you have to sit in front of a laptop all day.
All right. Well, on that note, what about balancing law school with some other outside responsibilities people might have? And these could be, run the whole gamut: significant others, children, pets, working, maybe community involvement, religion, non-law school friends, parents. Maybe they want you to go on vacation. What about Thanksgiving? What do you think about this?
Well, you've got to be really honest about, what other demands you have in your life, and maybe give them a bit more time than you think they're going to need. Because everybody, I think you can say like, oh, well, I can just, see my significant other, this many times a week, but then they might also feel neglected, and then that can cause relationship stress, which is not going to make it easier to be in school. So I think erring on the side of the fact that these other pieces of your life might need a little more time than you might first think that they need is probably a good idea.
Yeah, I think that's great if you can do it. I think also being really clear about the certain periods of time where you are not going to be as available can be helpful. So maybe you front load time with whoever you need to see in the week before you have your first legal writing assignment due, but then you make really clear to them, look, this week I really need to go underground and get this done. Yeah. And they may be more sympathetic if you're, a little more available before then, for you to be available. I mean, certainly during exams, like you right. just, that's the classic, like, I need this time.
Yeah. I think just having really open dialogues with everyone in your life that is supporting you through this about what you need to have them, be part of your village to be successful. If your parents really want a lot of time from you during the semester, you might have to have a really serious discussion with them about what's practical and what's setting you up for success. And maybe Thanksgiving and a lot of travel around Thanksgiving isn't going to be setting you up for success, but you can negotiate a little more time at home over the winter break. Or, if you are really involved in maybe your church or your temple and you have a lot of volunteer activities, but you're looking at your schedule and going like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can do everything. Then you need to go to the folks that you've made commitments to and say like, I need to readjust. I really want to stay involved, but I don't want to feel like I'm not cutting it, that everybody's getting what they need. Because if you feel like you're failing everybody, that's not going to help you be in a great mind space.
No, and Yeah, and people don't want you to feel that way, So
No.
I think getting them on board and saying, look, I'm going through this intense experience. I still want to make sure that I stay involved in this organization, but I do need to cut back. Here's what I feel like I could do. Hopefully that works for you, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And also using that time to decompress. So, if you're like volunteering with kids, you should be in the moment volunteering with kids, not worrying about your torts final that's coming up.
Yeah.
Or the same thing. I mean, a lot of the people who I knew in law school who were most successful were actually highly religious. And, basically the dictates of whatever religion that was demanded that they take certain days a week off. And they did that.
Yeah.
And they did perfectly fine because that was their day to rest and recuperate and take a break. And then they came back fresh.
I think that's a really good point. I think the other thing with children and pets and those who rely on you for things is to, depending on like the age of children, to try and set the expectations, but also call in your village, especially during challenging times like legal writing final exams or, final exams. Maybe there's a friend who can walk your dog, sometimes,
Right.
or you can send your children to a play date or call in grandparents or godparents or whoever might be the folks that you can ask for a little bit extra during the times that are going to be stressful. Because if you have things set up, it's more likely or not that your kid's going to be having fun doing whatever they're doing, and then you can feel free to focus on what you need to focus on.
Right. And that's also when it can make sense to have other friends who are similarly situated in law school. Like, maybe you make some law school parent friends and you guys trade babysitting time so that, if you have 3 or 4 of you, like one person goes to the park with the kids and the other 3 of you go to the library.
Right. And there are a lot of really creative ways to find your support network. I think it's just really important to remember that you're not doing this alone and that balancing these responsibilities can be something that you share with other folks to lighten the load.
Right. I think it's Ruth Bader Ginsburg who says, well, one of the reasons I did really well in law school is I had a small child. And so even though I was worried about, those things conflicting, actually they were complementary because when I went to school, I was motivated because I had a kid to provide for. And then when I was with my kid, I'm motivated because I see why I'm going to law school. So, she did okay for herself.
Yeah, she's done okay. All right. So what about some very specific situations around time management? What about folks who are commuting and driving? Should people utilize that time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, some people say, well, that's my time for myself and it's when I just relax, and that's totally fine. A lot of people want to be productive during that time. I mean, if you're commuting on the subway, that's a fantastic time to knock out a big chunk of reading. If you're commuting and driving or in a situation where you can't be reading, it's a little more challenging, but there are lots of audio options. There are audio sort of, I think basically if you search for any sort of 1L topic like contracts, audio, whatever, you're going to find all kinds of things where they basically explain the law to you. So that can be a great way to kind of, hear a recap on your way home. You can listen to podcasts, not just our own. There are lots of podcasts that are probably interesting and relevant. So I think you can use that time productively. And depending on how long it is, you may really need to. But, I think if it's just a 20-minute commute, like I don't think you have to pressure yourself. It could just be like a nice time to get your tea, get in your car, probably not listen to NPR these days, but, put on some nice relaxing music and kind of arrive at your next destination a little refreshed. You've had a moment to yourself. I think it could go either way.
Yeah, I think you make a good point with NPR that I think one of the things, and I know we talk about this in one of our other podcasts, that you really have to focus on is managing the anxiety of the outside world and keeping that contained with everything you have going on in your little world. Because I think that the tone of the news, the tone of what's going on in the world can just be really distracting, and it can amp us up. And then you are really frustrated about everything. And stress is something that can, go and permeate all parts of your life. And so you have to think about how you can digest what's going on in the world while still keeping your focus, or else you could find yourself like losing hours and hours reading the New York Times.
Or you arrive home and every day you're in a terrible mood because you've just heard of all the horrible things. You start yelling at your kids and they're like, wait, what's going on, honey? Like, you know. So I think boundaries. Everybody, you've got to put boundaries around the things that are going to be distracting for you.
Yeah, I agree. All right. So what about any time management strategies that really help kind of in the daily grind, especially around exam periods? Allison, what are some of your favorites?
Well, I think you've got to really think about how you're going to use your time during the exam period. Most schools have, a few days to a week beforehand. I mean, you have to clear your schedule. This is not a time to be like going to your friend's like bachelorette party.
Except I did that during final exams.
Yeah, which I mean you can do, but if you're going to do that, you need a plan for that right now.
And to be honest, they came to the Bay Area and I only went to like one part of it. I couldn't go do like a whole
weekend in Vegas.
Yeah.
So I mean at least look at your schedule, ideally clear your schedule because I've actually started reading Cal Newport's book Deep Work, and he makes a really interesting point about the neuroscience of learning, which is that when you focus on something that's hard, if you focus intently on it, your brain actually creates like new sheaths of myelin or something, I think it is. But if you have kind of like a scattered approach where you're like doing 6 different things at once, your brain is actually not able to create those pathways because you're not reinforcing those pathways.
That's interesting. It's so hard to focus and do one thing at a time these days. I mean, it really is. I think with the phones and the computers and everything, the multitasking that we do is just unbelievable. That anytime you try and sit down and say, I'm just going to do the one thing right now and not multitask, it's freeing, but then it's also a little spooky how quiet everything else seems.
Yeah, I would actually like literally lock myself in like the back corner of the library during exams without my phone or anything. And I would essentially, find a quiet cubicle. I had certain rooms that I liked and really just focus using the circles, my favorite method. But you have to put in that really focused time because otherwise you get attention residue and you're switching back and forth and your brain's just not working as efficiently as it could be. Whereas really focused deep work, he argues, and I tend to agree with this, is really the way to set yourself apart and end up being a winner in this economy and in this world where everyone is so distracted.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It's, again, we've talked in other podcasts about how we read things about kids and we find the advice about parenting kids to be really applicable to our lives as adults. And, all of this concern around media and children causing or not helping issues with ADHD and is it ADD now? I know that they just
they're actually slightly different. They're actually slightly different syndromes.
Okay, well, good. Then I am very uneducated on the topic, and I will get better at that. But attention deficit issues, possibly being fed by the fact that there's so much stimulation. And the other night, I had been like on my phone doing something, and the TV was on, and then I said, I'm going to lay my phone across the room, and I'm just going to watch TV. And it was like I had this moment where I'm like, wow, it's a really different experience to just watch TV.
Yeah, without your eye, like, is something popping up? Is it
right?
Need to deal with it? And frankly, most of what's popping up is not really like an emergency type situation.
No, even if it's from you, it's not an emergency type situation.
Yeah, I mean, if you're like, if it's 10 o'clock at night, you're like, okay, someone updated a Trello card. Is that meaningful? Speaking of Trello, let's talk about a couple of tools we find really helpful for managing your time in your life that I think you could easily incorporate in law school and would probably be life-changing.
Yeah.
First among them, our favorite, which is Trello.
Yes.
And Trello is kind of an electronic bulletin board, essentially, where you can have lists and any sort of process stuff you need to do, whether it's legal research and writing or, planning tasks with your study group or whatever it is. It's like an amazing tool for this.
And it's free to set it up, and other folks can collaborate on these boards with you. So I really think that for a study group or any sort of project you're working on with others, it could be really helpful to utilize an online tool to manage stuff outside the time that you're getting together.
Yeah, I mean, imagine that you want to do one hypo a week and you're going to have each person assigned to pick a certain hypo in in one class. Imagine if you just have a Trello board where they pick it, they attach it to the card, they drop it, and then you can assign due dates for which ones you're going to talk about and which dates. I mean, maybe this sounds insane to you, but I really think it could be helpful.
Or everybody's supposed to either write their own or find out a few examples of multiple choice questions, and you could put those on the Trello board and
and you're
circulate them.
And you're not wasting time looking for this stuff.
Yeah.
And you're not searching your email. It's just all, whenever it's asynchronous. So whenever you are ready to go and do your work, everything you need is right there. It's like magic.
It is like magic. It's possible much of our businesses run on Trello.
It's possible much of our lives are run on Trello.
That too.
I mean, if you're looking for an apartment, I've used it like apartment hunting. You know, I mean, you can use it for basically everything.
Vacation scheduling, you name it. Yeah. We love a good electronic calendar. I personally was really hesitant to switch over to an electronic calendar after years and years of like really having a deep love for paper calendars. But especially with some of these tools, an electronic calendar is really the way to go. But you have to commit to putting all of this stuff on it to make it work.
Yeah, and I think for some people it's still useful to have like a month by month like large wall calendar. You can totally have that in addition to your electronic calendar, but it's probably not going to be sufficient.
Yeah.
Speaking of calendars, again, like you might think this is crazy overkill. However, there's a tool called Calendly, which is also free for basic use, that allows people to schedule meetings with you. Mm-hmm. Now, this might sound crazy, but say your parents are like, calling you all the time and they're distracting you, you could actually have them set up a time to talk to you.
Yeah.
Or your study group, if you need to coordinate with a bunch of people, just send them the link. Everybody can sign up with it.
Yeah, you can even have, I think you might have to upgrade for this, but you can also have like a team where you can have like a group of people compare their schedules. I mean, there are lots of different things for kind of a nominal fee that you can even do. If you're trying to manage a group of people, it can be really effective.
Yeah, I mean, that might sound crazy to you to have your friends or your family schedule meetings with you, but if that's the only way you're going to be able to talk to them, it's better than not talking to them.
Yeah, and as much as it may seem impersonal, the beauty of being able to say, like, here, you just have access to my calendar is really freeing, because the back and forth emails of trying to schedule stuff can be so frustrating.
Yeah, or even like, I want to take the kids to the park, like for a play date. What's the best time to do that? 18 back and forth emails are, hey, here's when we're available this weekend. Pick a time that works for you.
Right.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah. And it goes straight to your calendar, so you don't even have to think about it.
Yeah. And that's the other beautiful thing about it, is it takes out the user error, which I am really terrible at, which is scheduling meetings and like missing information or screwing up the time. Like today I had a meeting at 11 o'clock and the meeting title was March 31st at 11 o'clock. That's what it said on my calendar. It didn't tell me what I was supposed to do at that meeting. That's how the meeting got saved in my calendar. So I was literally like, okie dokie.
Like, who might I have agreed to meet with and where and for what purpose? Mm-hmm. Is this a phone meeting? Is it a coffee date? Time to search the email,
Yeah, so that user error element can be totally removed by using some electronic tools.
Alrighty, well, we are way over time, so let's run through a few key takeaways that we want people to remember. I mean, number one, I think as much as people might resist it, you absolutely must plan your time in law school. And then you need to evaluate how that plan is working, make changes as needed, and reevaluate.
Yep. You need to know when to stop working, because if you're super tired, you're not getting any bang for your buck, and you're probably on the fast track to burnout. So make sure that you take breaks, rest, get some sleep, and eat some good food.
Yeah, because otherwise you're literally just wasting your time.
Yep.
Again, back to the focus. I mean, I think if you want to read something over the summer, I think Deep Work is a really interesting book. Multitasking is generally not your friend, and you need to be blocking distractions, because that's the way that you're really going to be able to get this stuff in your head in a way that you're going to be able to use and remember and be a star student instead of that person who's kind of struggling through and not really figuring out what's going on.
Yep. You need to use the study time you have effectively, because you want it to be high value. Activities are going to get harder as you move through the semester. So in the beginning of the semester, if you're thinking, oh my gosh, I cannot possibly work harder than this, then it's time to take a step back, because it's only going to get more intense as you have to start studying for exams.
Right. And I think for a lot of people, that might mean getting outside help, whether that's from someone in academic support, a mentor, and a different, an 2 or 3L, just say, look, I feel like I'm just drowning here. Mm-hmm. We hear that a lot. I feel like I'm drowning. Like, what should I be doing? Because someone might be able to help pinpoint the places where you might not be spending your time effectively. And that can, you know, say you even get a 20% increase in effectiveness. That's huge. That's like huge. Hours a week.
Yep, exactly. What else? Anything else?
Well, I mean, I think we've already mentioned it. You got to take breaks. Like, you can't study all the time. I mean, that's hard to hear, but you have to be, your brain has to be able to work effectively, or otherwise you're just wasting time, and that's not good.
Yep. And with that, we should go take a break because we're out of time. So before we finish up, I wanted to take a second to let you know that you can check out our Start Law School Right course on our website at lawschooltoolbox.com/start-law-school-right. This is an on-demand course which includes feedback from one of our amazing Law School Toolbox tutors, and it's going to help you understand how to excel in law school from day one. Check it out and feel free to contact us if you have any questions. If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a nice review and rating on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. New episodes are typically released on Monday. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.